And that is from the universe's perspective, where all of time has happened at once. Does it look anything like our finite perspective of time? No. From God's point of view, all of time has happened at once. So the idea that, we're going from one moment to the next, that's a result of our being a finite human being and only being aware of what's going on right now. So if we're asking God, okay, go ahead.
Could this also be with like Adam and Eve eating the fruit? This could also be like another kind of curse for us trying to understand time and actually be able to feel time. Because if you look at other animals, they don't see time the way we do. They eat, walk around, sleep, kill an animal, repeat. They don't worry about that.
Well, my one dog, when she goes out now, she's very concerned about the leaves all falling. She doesn't like that. She's only 3 years old, so I guess she's like, hey, what's going on? So is she perceiving time passing? I feel confident that animals understand time to some extent. And by the way, when we talk about humans and we think we're aware of time, guess what? There's all kinds of cultural perceptions on time, and not everybody that we're aware of perceives time the same way. Remember, it seems to depend on your language and your culture, how you perceive the world around you. And there are places that don't have the same kinds of past tense, future tense. Everything is present tense in some languages, which admittedly we would consider primitive because of that, right? But that assumes then that the speakers of that language are not aware of these kinds of past pluperfect, tense. What is that, right? But yes, I think the problem, of course, is the finite. For Augustine, we're not omnipotent, we're not omniscient, we're not omnibeneficent. All the omnis that you apply to the conception of the divine, even the universe. If you think, does the universe know? Well, in the big picture that we talk about as everything is information today, well, by definition, the universe already knows everything, right? Knows what you're going to do tomorrow. Knows what you did, and knows when you die. So in that sense, the universe knows everything. And where this becomes a problem for Augustine, and in a way, I think he's actually inventing the concept of free will. And the problem is that God knows what you're going to do. And at the same time, God will punish you for doing it. And that doesn't seem right. Number one, why would God create evil? Augustine argues, no, there is no such thing. There's no evil. It's our perception that there's evil. And that occurs because there's a lack. So even if, I've got, pumpkin pie. Wow, I love pumpkin pie. Apple pie. Wow. What? No pecan pie? Where's the pecan pie? There's a lack here, right? That's not something that's evil in the universe, but I'll perceive it as evil in the sense that, I was really looking forward to pecan pie and there isn't any, right? I was hoping for something and it's not there. So for me, that's a lack, and the lack of something. When you're sick, you feel like, wow, that's evil. And what is it? For Augustine, it's a lack of health. He's got an escape route, this way. That you never actually have the existence of evil. It's always perceived as evil, and most often that's perceived that way because it's a lack, right? Well, we also have a lack of understanding of what we're going to do, but it certainly seems to a lot of people that it's evil for God to punish you for doing something that God basically made you do, because you're determined. everything that you do, from Sapolsky's point of view, is a result of, all these things that we can now describe scientifically. And so there's no such thing as free agency, and as a result, we would actually improve the world by stop blaming people for the choices they make. Instead of putting them in jail, we should train them. Instead of punishing them for doing something, we should explain to them why that was wrong. I don't know. Nobody's really taking Sapolsky that seriously, But, that's his argument. Well, for Augustine, the real solution here is to say that even though God knows what you're going to do, and he basically set you up for this opportunity to fail, you're still the free agent that has to choose it. So for Augustine, it's not a conflict in thinking that it's God's fault that I've done the evil thing, and so I shouldn't be punished for it. It's God's fault, after all, right? No, it's your choice. You still have the free choice to do this or that. And just because God already knows ahead of time what choice you're making, and he's sad because that's the wrong choice, it's still your fault that you made that choice. And so the evil comes into the world because of the choices we make, not because of the nature of God. And by the way, it goes even back to the story about the angels, the fallen angels. If you remember, we're not the only ones that have fallen, according to the different stories in Scripture. The angels were originally made closer to God than us. And they all had, it was absolutely beautiful. And Lucifer, right, is the best angel of them all, actually, according to the stories, right? But Lucifer looks at God and sees the glory of God, and then looks at himself, and in looking at himself realizes the lack of that kind of glory that he has in himself that is already there in God. And as he realizes that lack, that feeling of evil enters into him from that point on. So basically it's his freedom to notice and look at himself that causes the evil that ends up in the heart of Lucifer. And of course he becomes Satan, right? He's the evil one. Now, this point of view, by the way, was satisfactory to Augustine, apparently. But remember, Augustine is going to be very, very influential. Christian sects literally are going to be Augustinian, even if they're influenced by Aquinas, right? Aquinas adds nuances of difference. But John Calvin, famously, is an Augustinian. One of the things that Augustine does is write up the rule of how to live to be like Jesus, right? Jesus asks us to come and follow him. Well, how do we do that? Well, these are the ways we can live. And basically, they're very similar to the Buddhist Eightfold Path. Very similar. If you think about it, there are all these religions when you put the Platonic view, Buddhism, when you think about it, they all end up basically arguing that giving up our attachment to things of the material world is the best way to literally move up, move our souls away from attachment to the corruption of the earth, which is where evil comes from. So if you want to get away from the miseries of life, stop having attachments. Stop wanting nice food. Stop wanting to have nice cars. First thing you do when you drive the car off the lot is you have an accident and it gets ruined anyway. Whatever, right? You can go play with that, however you like. But you get the idea, I think, that it's our attachment to things It's our desires that create the evils that we experience. And so it's satisfactory for Augustine. But by the time we get to John Calvin, which so this is also the time of Martin Luther. So what you're looking at here is the Reformation, and both Calvin and both Luther were Augustinian monks. So those, they took the oath to follow the order of St. Augustine, how to live following Jesus by giving up wealth, take the vow of poverty, right? Not own things, not even the clothes that you're wearing. Those are the orders, not yours, right? And so on. John Calvin, in doing his Institutes of the Christian Religion, views this situation as predestination. God knows what choices you're going to make ahead of time, right? And so he already knows whether you're saved or not. And it turns out from his analysis of that, this is way different than Augustine, right? The problem initially is there in Augustine, but by the time we get to John Calvin, that problem of predestination means that if you're one of the chosen, you will live a life that's absolutely wonderful, whereas if you're fallen from your predestination to do evil, you will look it. In other words, if you're a wealthy person, you're clearly saved. If you're living in a tent on the Glen Highway, you're clearly fallen. In other words, the wealthy are clearly chosen by God to be wealthy because they are good people, they're saved. Impoverished people are sinners. Does that sound like a big part of our culture? Of people that believe that, right? That believe that the main thing we ought to do is punish, right? Not help. If they are in desperate need, it's their fault, right? Because they're sinners, they're fallen. Shouldn't give them money from our wealth to help them. Instead, what we ought to do is punish them because they're evil. They've made the wrong choices. Otherwise, why would they be there? So that's very interesting. You see that in the Presbyterian Church, the Calvinists, of course. So that's has its beginnings in Augustine's interpretation of free will, and this connection then. But what else? Actually, I made a list of things. I should actually take up the paper. Wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. So the conversion time, I talked about that. City of God, I haven't talked about that. Let's talk about that. Actually, I've already talked about this. So how does Augustine talk about evil? Evil is a privation of good. Evil is not a substance or a created thing, but rather a privation or a lack. Right? In the role of free will, Augustine placed significant emphasis on human free will. He believed that God gave humans free will so that they could freely choose to love and obey him. However, with free will comes the possibility of choosing wrongly. Augustine explained that moral evil entered the world through the free choice of human beings to turn away from God, beginning with the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And by the way, that fall, as far as Augustine is concerned, gives all of us as daughters and sons of Adam and Eve original sin. Original sin. So you're already born as an infant with original sin. How many of you have heard of this before? Few, yes. What on earth is that? Well, I interpret it, I'm interpreting Augustine as understanding that from the get-go, as a child, we've already inherited our parents' belief in this being good and this being bad. So we grow up in a family where good and evil already are present. Can't escape it. So basically we're stuck. We have this original sin, and as a result we think there's evil in the world. And as a result there's suffering also. It's the consequence of sin. And in a sense, I think if we interpret